I am a millennial business owner, and for most of my life, I've heard that my generation is the problem. If you fall into the generational thinking trap, then buckle up. You are not going to want to miss this one. Let's get it started. Hello, and welcome to Stack and Startup Al Fresco, the show where we ask you to think outside the box as we talk about business growth, leadership, and the real strategies behind scaling companies. Today, I want to challenge a narrative, not emotionally, not defensively, with evidence. Because for years, the story has been millennials are entitled. Millennials are not resilient. Millennials are not built for business. But when you actually look at the data, the story does not hold. And if you're a millennial building a business right now, you need to understand something clearly. You're not operating at a disadvantage. In many ways, you are operating with structural advantages. So let's reset the frame. Millennials are now turning 30 and go all the way to their mid 40s. This is prime leadership age, decision making age, business building age. And the numbers reflect that. Millennials represent roughly 34 to 38% of entrepreneurs in the United States. That is not a fringe group. That is a dominant force in business creation. So the question is no longer, can millennials build businesses? The real question is, what are they doing differently and why? Why is it working? Millennials entered the workforce during the Great Recession. That matters more than people realize because early economic conditions shape behavior. What my generation learned early is stability is not guaranteed. Traditional career paths can collapse, and you need to adapt quickly. And that shows up directly in entrepreneurship. Millennial founders are consistently described as more adaptable, more opportunistic during disruption, more willing to build in uncertain conditions. This is not theory, this is conditioning. They did not learn business in stability, they learned it in disruption. And in today's economy, that is an advantage. Let's talk about capability. Over 52% of millennial entrepreneurs have a college degree, higher than the broader entrepreneur population. And about 35% have experience in tech related fields. That combination matters because modern business is digital, systems driven, and technology dependent. This is where millennials are not catching up, they are operating natively. And you see it in behavior: faster adoption of digital tools, comfort with remote infrastructure, early investment in online presence. That is not just performance, that is structural advantage in a digital economy. Now, let's talk performance. According to data tied to the Kaufman Foundation, 65% of millennial founded businesses survive beyond 3 years, compared to 58% for Gen X and 51% for baby boomers. That's not a small difference. That is a measurable gap in survival, which raises a better question: why? Because millennial businesses tend to be leaner, more adaptable, less dependent on heavy upfront capital. In fact, around 72% of millennial startups are bootstrapped. That forces discipline, and discipline increases survival. There is a common critique. Millennials care too much about purpose. Let's reframe that. About 35% of millennial founders say solving a problem matters more than money. That's not weakness, that is alignment. And alignment creates stronger branding, clearer messaging, and more loyal customers. This is why millennial owned businesses generate an estimated $1.8 trillion in annual revenue in the United States. Purpose is not replacing profit, it is strengthening it. Millennial entrepreneurship is more diverse than previous generations. Examples: 44% of millennial solopreneurs are women, 29% are first generation immigrants, 22% of millennial owned businesses are minority owned. That matters for one reason: perspective. More perspective leads to more ideas, better problem solving, and a broader market understanding. Diversity is not just representation, it is a business advantage. Now, millennial founders do not always build for scale first. They build for sustainability, flexibility, and control. That is often misunderstood, but it results in lower overhead, more efficient operations, and more durable businesses. They're not trying to win fast, they're trying to last. Okay, so before we go further, it is worth pressure testing all of this because there are real criticisms of millennial business owners, and ignoring them would be a disservice. One of the most common arguments is financial. Millennials are carrying much more debt than previous generations, especially student debt. That is true. According to data from the Federal Reserve, millennials hold a significant portion of the 1.7 plus trillion in US student loan debt. So the argument is, if you're starting behind financially, you are at a disadvantage in business. But here's what actually happens. That constraint often forces, as said before, leaner startups, lower overhead, and a faster path to revenue. And we already saw this earlier. Around 72%, again, 72% of millennial businesses are bootstrapped. Constraint doesn't always limit performance. In many cases, it improves discipline. Another criticism: millennials are more risk adverse. There is some truth here. Research from the Kauffman Foundation suggests younger founders are often more cautious with capital. But that gets misinterpreted because what looks like risk aversion is often risk management. Instead of raising large amounts of capital early, scaling aggressively without validation, you see testing ideas first, building revenue earlier, and controlling burn. That does not slow business down. It often keeps them alive. And again, the survival data supports this. Millennial founded businesses show higher 3-year survival rates. A third criticism: They prioritize balance over growth. This one comes up often. The idea millennials care too much about work-life balance and not enough about grinding. But let's translate that into business terms. What that actually creates is better systems, more efficient workflows, and less dependency on constant founder effort. And in the long run, that leads to more scalable businesses. Because if your business only works when you are overworked, it does not scale. Another critique, millennials pivot too much. And I personally have seen this time and time again with some of my peers. So there is some truth to this. But in modern markets, customer behavior changes quickly. Technology shifts rapidly. Competition moves fast. So the ability to adjust is not instability, it is responsiveness. And in business, responsiveness is often the difference between relevance and irrelevance. So, yes, there are valid criticisms. But when you look deeper, many of those criticisms are actually descriptions of a different operating model. Not a weaker one, a more adaptive one. And in the current business environment, adaptability is not optional. It is required. So, are millennials perfect business owners? Not necessarily. But the criticism is often outdated. What gets labeled as cautious, skeptical, and selective is often strategic, intentional, and informed. And the results support that. Higher survival rates, stronger digital execution, and greater adaptability. That is not a weakness. That is evolution. If you are a millennial building a business, you are not trying to prove a point. You are operating in a different environment with different tools and different expectations. And when you understand that, you stop comparing yourself to outdated models and start building something that actually works now. So, I am a millennial business owner. And the goal is not to win an argument about generations. The goal is to build something that performs. And if you do that consistently, the narrative will correct itself. Thank you for tuning in to Stack and Startup Al Fresco. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss future episodes. You can find us on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts to follow along as we continue to explore business and technology from a different perspective. Lastly, if you want to support these conversations directly, you can become a patron at patreon.com/stackandstartup. Until next time, keep thinking outside the box.